The city woke up every morning under a curtain of glass and steel, and at the very top of it lived people who never heard the noise below. Penthouse windows reflected the sunrise like gold mirrors, and behind one of those windows stood Daniel Kang, the billionaire's son, young, handsome, and dangerously convinced the world existed for his comfort. Daniel's mornings didn't begin with alarms. They began with assistants knocking softly, curtains gliding open at the press of a button, the city bowing beneath his view. Luxury cars waited downstairs like obedient animals. Credit cards had no limits. Rules had never applied. If you're excited to follow this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next thrilling moments. He smirked at his reflection while adjusting his designer jacket. Another boring day, he muttered, scrolling through his phone, barely listening as one of his friends laughed behind him. "Bro, your father bought that cafe chain last month, right?" one of them said, slouching on a leather couch. Daniel shrugged. "Bought it, sold it, shut it down, what's the difference?" His voice carried casual cruelty, the kind that came from never being told no. They spilled out into the private elevator, laughter echoing against marble walls. Outside, the city buzzed, vendors shouting, buses coughing smoke, people rushing to earn what Daniel spent without thought. He noticed none of it. In his world, waiters were invisible, drivers were tools, and apologies were for the weak. At a red light, his car slowed near a small cafe tucked between towering buildings. Daniel glanced at it with mild irritation, like it was clutter ruining the view. "Let's stop here," he said suddenly. His friends looked surprised. "This place?" "Yeah," Daniel replied. "I want coffee. Now." Inside the cafe, the air smelled of roasted beans and warm bread. The place was simple, wooden tables, soft music, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Daniel walked in like a king entering a peasant's hall. Conversation softened. Heads turned. He tapped his fingers impatiently on the counter. "Hey," he called out, not bothering to look at the menu. "Make it quick." The waitress turned, startled but polite, already moving toward him. Daniel leaned back, smirking, completely unaware that this small, forgettable cafe was about to become the place where his golden world would crack, and where consequences, long delayed, were quietly catching up to him. Morning light filtered gently through the cafe's wide front windows, settling softly on wooden tables worn smooth by years of use. Outside, the city moved at its usual restless pace, cars humming, footsteps echoing, but inside, time felt slower, kinder. This cafe was a small island of calm in a sea of concrete. Behind the counter stood Hana, tying her apron tighter around her waist. Her movements were practiced, careful. Every cup placed just right. Every table wiped until it shone. She had learned long ago that mistakes were expensive, and carelessness even more so. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, rich and comforting. An elderly man sat near the window, reading the newspaper, occasionally lifting his cup with trembling hands. Two office workers whispered to each other in the corner, sharing quiet laughter before the weight of the day settled on their shoulders. "Good morning," Hana said softly as she passed by, her voice gentle but steady. "Morning, dear," the old man replied, smiling. "Same as always." She nodded, already preparing his order before he finished the sentence. Regulars mattered here. People mattered. Hana hadn't always worked in cafes. Once, she had dreamed of finishing school, of helping her mother move out of their cramped apartment on the edge of the city. But dreams didn't pay rent. Life had arrived early, heavy and demanding. So she worked, double shifts, tired feet, polite smiles, sending most of her earnings home. As she poured hot water over freshly ground beans, her mind wandered briefly. Just a few more hours, she told herself. Then I can rest. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Hana glanced up instinctively. New customers meant new chances, and new risks. Most people were kind. Some were impatient. A few looked at her like she wasn't really there. She smoothed her apron, preparing herself. Outside, expensive engines purred as a sleek car came to a stop. Laughter drifted in through the opening door, loud, careless, out of place in the quiet room. The temperature of the cafe seemed to shift, though no one could explain why. Hana straightened, offering the same polite smile she always did, unaware that her calm morning was about to shatter, that the simple kindness of this small cafe was about to collide head-on with a world that had never learned respect. And as the door swung fully open, the line between humility and arrogance vanished in a single step forward. The cafe door swung open with a sharp jingle, cutting through the soft hum of morning like a crack of thunder. Laughter spilled inside first, loud, careless, out of place, followed by Daniel Kang and his friends. The warmth of the cafe seemed to shrink as he entered, his presence heavy, demanding attention without asking for it. Daniel didn't pause to look around. He didn't notice the old man by the window or the tired workers savoring their last quiet minutes. His eyes skimmed the room the way someone inspected a possession, quick, bored, dismissive. "Wow," one of his friends muttered, glancing at the modest decor. "This place is vintage." Daniel scoffed. "You mean cheap?" A few heads turned. Conversations faded. Behind the counter, Hana felt her shoulders tense, but she stepped forward anyway, her smile polite, her voice calm. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" Daniel barely looked at her. "Coffee," he said flatly. "Hot. Strong. And don't take forever." Hana nodded. "Of course, sir. It'll just be a moment." A moment. The word alone seemed to irritate him. He leaned against the counter, tapping his fingers, each sound loud in the sudden quiet. His gaze wandered lazily over the cafe, then landed back on Hana, lingering longer than necessary. "Do people still work places like this by choice?" he said aloud, not caring who heard. One of his friends chuckled. Hana pretended not to hear. She focused on the machine, on the measured grind of beans, on keeping her hands steady. The coffee maker hissed softly, steam rising. Seconds passed. Maybe 30. Maybe less. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Seriously?" he snapped. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I'm sorry, sir," Hana said gently, turning toward him. "The machine." "I didn't ask for excuses," Daniel cut in, his voice sharp enough to slice through the room. "I asked for coffee." The cafe felt smaller now. The old man lowered his newspaper. The staff exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke. No one moved. Hana's cheeks warmed, not from the steam but from embarrassment. Still, she nodded. "It'll be ready in just a second." Daniel straightened, irritation flashing across his face. He picked up the cup the moment it touched the counter, his fingers tightening around it. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his patience finally snapping. In that instant, between steam and silence, between power and restraint, the air shifted. What should have been an ordinary exchange teetered on the edge of something ugly. And Daniel Kang, blinded by entitlement, was about to cross a line he could never step back from. The cup trembled slightly in Daniel Kang's hand, thin wisps of steam curling upward like a warning no one stopped to read. The cafe was quiet now, too quiet. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. Hana reached for the receipt, her voice still gentle despite the tension pressing against her chest. "Sir, here's your—" "Don't talk," Daniel snapped, his jaw tight, eyes sharp with irritation. "You people are all the same. Slow. Careless." She froze, fingers hovering in the air. For a brief moment, she met his eyes, not with anger, not with defiance, but with confusion. As if she truly couldn't understand how something so small had turned so cruel. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean." That was when Daniel laughed. A short, bitter sound. "Sorry," he repeated. "You think that fixes everything?" Before anyone could react, before reason or restraint could catch up to his rage, Daniel tilted the cup forward. The hot coffee poured out in a sudden, violent arc. Hana gasped as the liquid splashed across her hands and apron, heat searing through fabric and skin. The cup clattered to the floor, rolling uselessly as she stumbled back, shock stealing the air from her lungs. A sharp cry escaped her before she could stop it. Time fractured. Someone screamed. A chair scraped loudly against the floor. The old man by the window stood up halfway, frozen in disbelief. The café, once filled with warmth and routine, was now carved open by silence and horror. Hana, a coworker whispered, rushing forward but stopping short, unsure, afraid. Hana stared down at her trembling hands, red and shaking, coffee dripping onto the floor like dark stains of humiliation. Her eyes burned, not just from pain, but from something deeper. From being seen as nothing. From being hurt for no reason at all. Daniel stood there, chest rising and falling, as if he'd just won something. "Watch where you're standing next time," he said coldly, as though he'd spilled water, not cruelty. No one spoke. No one moved. The city outside continued on, horns honking, people laughing, unaware that inside this small cafe, something had broken. A line had been crossed so easily it felt unreal. Hana slowly lifted her head. Her lips parted, but no words came. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the room had taken something from her in that moment. Behind Daniel, unnoticed by him, the door to the cafe stood open just long enough for a shadow to fall across the floor. And in that shadow, calm and unmoving, consequences finally arrived. The cafe door closed with a soft click, quiet, controlled, almost respectful. No one noticed it at first. All eyes were still locked on Hana, on the spilled coffee soaking into the floor, on the echo of cruelty that hung in the air like smoke. Then the room seemed to change. Not louder. Not darker. Just, heavier. Behind Daniel Kang, a man stood perfectly still. He was tall, dressed simply in a dark coat that looked out of place among designer jackets and hurried city fashion. His hair was neatly combed, his face unreadable, calm to the point of being unsettling. Beside him sat a large canine, muscles coiled beneath its fur, eyes alert, unblinking. The dog did not growl. It did not move. It simply watched. The man had seen everything. From the first impatient word, from the sharp insult. From the moment hot coffee left the cup and turned into pain. He hadn't reacted, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't need to. This was Mr. Han, a name rarely spoken aloud, and never lightly. In certain circles, he was known as a Korean mafia boss. Not the loud, flashy kind. The kind who survived because he didn't rush. The kind whose silence carried more weight than most men's threats. Daniel remained unaware, adjusting his sleeve, scoffing under his breath. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head as if he were the victim. Mr. Han's gaze rested on Daniel's back. Calm. Measuring. Like a hunter deciding whether prey was worth the effort. The canine shifted slightly, claws making a faint sound against the tile. One waitress noticed and sucked in a quiet breath. A customer's hand trembled as they reached for their phone, then stopped, thinking better of it. Mr. Han lifted one hand. The dog stilled instantly. No words were exchanged. No signals visible to anyone else. Yet the message was clear, wait. Mr. Han took a single step forward. The floor creaked beneath his shoe. It was the only sound in the cafe. Daniel felt something then, a strange chill, like someone had walked over his grave. He frowned, sensing eyes on him, though his pride refused to let him turn around just yet. Behind him stood a man who did not raise his voice, did not rush to defend, did not explode in anger. A man who believed consequences should arrive slowly, so they could be fully understood. And as Mr. Han prepared to speak, the power in the room quietly shifted, away from money, away from arrogance, towards something far more dangerous, controlled authority. The reckoning was about to begin. The sound of a single footstep echoed across the cafe floor. Daniel Kang turned slowly, irritation still etched across his face, until his eyes met the man standing behind him. Whatever words he had prepared dissolved instantly. The air felt tighter now, heavier, as if the room itself had decided to listen. Mr. Han stood a few feet away, posture relaxed, hands folded calmly in front of him. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not amused. Just observant. Beside him, the K9 sat perfectly still, head lifted, eyes locked on Daniel with quiet intensity. No one spoke. Even the city noise outside seemed to fade. Mr. Han broke the silence, not loudly, not sharply, but with a voice so steady it demanded attention. "Is this how you speak to people?" he asked. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Who are you?" he snapped, though the edge in his voice was duller now. Less confident. Mr. Han tilted his head slightly, studying him. "That's not important," he replied. "What matters is what you just did." He glanced past Daniel to Hana, who stood near the counter, hands shaking, eyes lowered. The sight lingered for a moment too long. When Mr. Han looked back, something colder had entered his gaze. "You spilled hot coffee on her," he said calmly. "Did it make you feel powerful?" Daniel scoffed weakly. "She was slow. People like her need to learn." "People like her?" Mr. Han interrupted softly. 2 words. Quiet. Precise. Daniel swallowed. His friend shifted behind him, suddenly very interested in the floor. Mr. Han took 1 step closer. The K9 rose smoothly to its feet without a sound. No growl. No threat. Just presence. "You confuse money with authority," Mr. Han continued. "And fear with respect. That mistake ruins men." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he couldn't find the right words. The café watched, breath held. Mr. Han gestured gently toward Hana. "She worked. She served. She showed restraint when you showed none." He turned back to Daniel. "Tell me," he asked quietly, "when was the last time someone told you no?" The question landed harder than a slap. Daniel's face flushed. His confidence cracked, just slightly. "You don't know who my father is," he said, clinging to the last shield he had. Mr. Han nodded once. "I know exactly who he is," he replied. "And he taught you wealth. But not honor." Silence followed, thick, undeniable. Mr. Han didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't touch him. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, everyone in the café understood the truth. Real power didn't shout, didn't rush, didn't need permission. And Daniel Kang, standing in the wreckage of his own arrogance, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The café had never felt smaller. Every eye, every breath, every tick of the clock seemed magnified. Daniel Kang's arrogance had crumbled, replaced by a tense awareness he had never experienced before. Across from him, Mr. Han stood unmoving, calm, a silent storm of authority. The K9 at his side was still, but its presence alone made the room feel alive with caution, like a forest on the edge of a predator's territory. Daniel swallowed hard. He glanced around at the faces of the café's patrons, regulars, students, a young couple quietly sipping tea, all watching, all waiting. The humiliation of being seen, truly seen, gnawed at him in a way money never could. "You will speak," Mr. Han said softly. His voice didn't rise, didn't bark, didn't demand through volume, it simply carried weight, absolute and undeniable. "And you will speak honestly." Daniel's throat felt tight. His ego screamed to resist, to push back, to act like the rich heir untouchable by morality or consequence. But the stillness in Mr. Han's eyes, and the quiet intensity of the K9, pressed down on him like gravity. I, Daniel stammered, then stopped, shaking slightly. The room held its breath. Finally, with a flush spreading across his face, he managed, "I'm sorry." The words were small, awkward, but they hung in the air. Hana's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with relief. The patrons murmured softly, a wave of quiet approval rippling through the room. "You will do more than say it," Mr. Han continued, stepping slightly closer. "You will understand it. Apologize, to her. To everyone here who saw what arrogance looks like when unchecked. Daniel swallowed again, his voice firmer now, shaky but real. I apologize for my actions. To you, to everyone here. I was wrong. I should not have, he stopped, the heat of shame rising on his face, but the words were sincere enough that the cafe could feel the weight of them. The canine shifted slightly, a subtle reminder that eyes were still watching, that accountability was still present. Daniel's friend shuffled uncomfortably, and used to seeing their world so completely stripped of pretense. Mr. Han finally nodded once. A small, quiet gesture. Not triumphant, not cruel. Just acknowledgement. The lesson had been delivered. The son had tasted the sting of real consequences, the kind that money could never buy, the kind that humility and honesty demand. The room exhaled collectively. The cafe's warm, ordinary light seemed to return, though the echo of what had happened lingered in every corner. Daniel Kang, for the first time, truly felt the weight of his choices, and it changed him, whether he knew it or not. Outside, the city continued its clamor, oblivious, while inside, a quiet justice had taken root. The cafe had returned to its quiet rhythm, but the air still felt thick, charged with the aftermath of what had just unfolded. The soft hum of conversation returned slowly, punctuated by the clatter of cups and the scrape of chairs, but there was a reverent pause in the atmosphere, a collective exhale after witnessing something unforgettable. Hana stood near the counter, hands still trembling, but her shoulders lifted slightly. Customers offered small nods, quiet words of reassurance. "Are you okay?" an elderly man asked softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hana nodded, finally allowing herself a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She looked around at the warm cafe, the soft sunlight spilling across the wooden tables, and felt a sense of gratitude for the solidarity of the ordinary world. Daniel Kang remained frozen in the center of the room, his face pale, lips parted as if words could come, but none did. For the first time in his life, money, status, and inherited arrogance were meaningless. The weight of his actions pressed down on him with a clarity that no wealth could erase. He glanced down at the spilled coffee, now just a dark stain on the floor, a quiet monument to his own carelessness and cruelty. I didn't think, he muttered, voice barely audible, almost to himself. Hana, gathering her courage, met his gaze. "It's not just about the coffee," she said softly. "It's about respect. Something money can't buy, something you have to earn." Daniel swallowed hard. The word struck deeper than any reprimand or punishment could have. He opened his mouth to reply, but no apology felt sufficient. All he could do was nod, the recognition of his arrogance settling heavily in his chest. Outside, the sound of the city resumed its constant rhythm, honking horns, distant chatter, the hum of life moving on. But inside the cafe, the lesson lingered, carried in every glance, every heartbeat. The Korean Mafia boss had departed quietly, leaving no trace but the undeniable imprint of authority, justice, and moral clarity. The silent force of accountability had spoken, and its message would not be forgotten. Hana returned to her work, steadier now, a small smile tugging at her lips as she glanced at Daniel. He avoided her eyes, but the realization burned brighter than embarrassment. Money could shield him from almost everything, but it could not protect him from consequence. And in that quiet, ordinary cafe, the extraordinary truth had been made clear: respect, humility, and accountability were forces far stronger than wealth, and lessons learned in the heat of arrogance sometimes linger forever. The sunlight shifted, spilling across the counter, illuminating the faint steam from freshly poured coffee. And with it, life returned, changed, yet quietly continuing, just like the people who had witnessed it all.